shame comes from the beliefs you have about yourself. I know that to be true in my life because my beliefs about myself have changed and my shame is almost completely gone. It's kind of rare when it pops up. And when it does, I'm like, okay, why did that show up? And so that to me is encouraging because as we change the beliefs about ourselves, that shame is going to go away. And we're going to finally realize in our heart of hearts, you need to tell an adult. You absolutely need to tell somebody, your school counselor, another adult that you trust. Usually, if you can go to a family friend or another family member and share with them, the one thing that failed me in my life, and I would hate to see this happen to any child that's listening, is all the adults failed me. They all failed me. And so that's why I ended up on my own. Statistics I found very interesting is that on average, women are sexually abused between the ages of 13 and 17, and they don't share that story for 4 decades. These women are suffering for 40 years before they share it and start to get help. That's not okay.
Welcome to Through the Trauma podcast. My name is Amber Larkins, published photographer, storytelling expert, visual artist, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach. This podcast was born from one question: how do I get inspiring stories of triumph out to the people who need to hear them the most? Come with me, enter my world, where lives are getting changed, heroes are getting developed, and greatness is being achieved. And we are back with another episode of Through the Trauma podcast. I am Amber, your host, and today I have with me Miss Lisa Tickle. Lisa is a childhood abuse survivor. She is dedicated her whole life turning her pain into purpose by dedicating her life to helping others heal, empowering them on their journey of healing if they've also gone through abuse. So she has her own podcast called Healing and Growing Hand in Hand, where she helps navigate these difficult topics of abuse and dealing with trauma and all of the things. So, Lisa, it's so nice to have you here today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me as a guest. I appreciate it. I love getting the word out.
Yeah, well, that's what it's all about, is just raising awareness. And I tell people, letting them know they're not alone.
Exactly. That's so big.
Yeah, we all have some type of trauma that we're dealing with, and navigating the healing process of that is not always easy. So it's great that we have people like yourself, advocates, people that are doing amazing things. I know you have some resources and workshops and things that we'll get into, but it's just awesome to sit with someone like yourself and learn more and raise awareness around these things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you.
So why don't you just start by giving my audience a little bit of a background of yourself and, who you are and why you do what you do.
Sure. So I am a survivor, and my abuse goes back as far as I can remember. I don't remember not having it in my life. And, and I had every type of abuse except for sexual, fortunately. And it was my brother and my mother and my father. And it went on for several years. And, I was aware enough in my teenage years to realize that I was being abused. And I also was aware, and I don't know where I knew this from, but that trauma and child abuse carries on in the family. And it even made me consider not having children because I was so afraid of that. And then at 16 years old, I lost my mother to cancer. And so that was just another trauma on top of what was already going on in my life. But I do remember at 19 starting my healing journey. And, I'm 61 years old, so it's been a while. And, back in the day for many years, there wasn't any kind of really trauma therapy or modalities. So I did so much of this on my own. And it was just basically me and God working it out. And then in the early 2000s, I had discovered a workshop at my church that was helping women heal from childhood abuse. And I went through that workshop, and it was really helpful to me. But what was interesting that I discovered at that point, I always thought it was just my brother that was abusing me. And this is really common among childhood abuse survivors. I just was focused on my brother, and I thought, I don't really need to go to the workshop because I've worked through it. I've forgiven him. What I realized in the workshop, though, that I also had abuse by my parents. And at this point, I'm in my 30s, right? So it's amazing that I went all those years without kind of really understanding that. So after I did the workshop and I found it really profound, the lady about 5 years later who was running the workshop, who created it, reached out to myself and a good friend of mine and asked us to take it over. And so we did that for 8 years. And that was amazing to be able to watch these women start their healing journey. And it was just, you cannot pay me enough money for that feeling. It was so wonderful. And of course, you do your own deeper healing too, right? As you're doing these things. And so, you know, what I had realized, I didn't realize it at the time. I realize now, though, I still was in survival mode and full on survival mode and victim mentality as well. And it wasn't until my world got really kind of shaken up in 2011 when I went through a divorce that I really started to look deep inside. And then there was more of the trauma therapy out there. So that was available to me. And so I reached out for that as well. And I've done substantial amount of healing. My healing journey, though, is until I take my last breath. But I've come so far. And the one thing that bothered me this whole time is all those years there wasn't information out there for me that could have helped me, that could have shortened my pain, right? And so that's what's always motivated me to do something like doing the podcast and doing the workshop that help people to help shorten their pain. Because one of the statistics I found very interesting is that on average, women are sexually abused between the ages of 13 and 17, and they don't share that story for 4 decades. These women are suffering for 40 years before they share it and start to get help. That's not okay. And I have found that to be true with the other type of abuse as well, because you've got shame, and that shame just shuts your voice down.
I mean, every time I hear statistics, I'm alarmed because we just, you know, if you have not been exposed to that, it's like it's out of sight, out of mind. And
Yes.
which is why, like you said, why we do podcasts and things like this, so that people can know that this is really out there. And on top of that, to know that the healing process, it's not an overnight thing. It's not something that someone just, oh, I realize I've been abused, now I get over it.
Correct.
Trauma is a lifelong journey. And I'm glad that you said that, because I think sometimes people can beat themselves up where they begin to feel like there is the shame, but then if they overcome the shame, then there's this thing of, I just need to move on.
Yeah, you want to move on. You don't want to feel the pain anymore.
Yeah. But sometimes I think when people can't move on, they begin to feel like they beat themselves up. They feel down on themselves because I can't move on. It seems like everyone's supposed to just move on from this. And I've realized that trauma is one of those things that it's everybody, it affects people differently. And every type of trauma is different on every human being. And it's just, we have to have grace and mercy on ourselves.
Yes. And spend a lot of time forgiving ourselves. That was one thing that was really surprising to me when someone finally said that to me, because I had focused so much on forgiving my abusers that when they said, well, you need to forgive yourself, it like literally took my breath away. And it is something that we do need to do, because we are hard on ourselves. And we are, you know, we've learned this from our childhood, right? Because in my case, my parents were abusing me. And so I learned how to be mean because they were mean to me. And so I realized later on in life, that's one of the things that really shocked me one day when I was walking out of the bathroom, and there was something that happened. I don't remember. It was some minor thing, but I stepped out of the bathroom and realized, what is that voice in my head? Someone was yelling at me. It was me. I was yelling at myself. Yeah. It literally stopped me in my tracks. And I went, whoa, okay, that's not okay. Why are you yelling? Oh, it was really interesting. And so that's why, yes, it's a lifelong journey. It does get easier. It does get easier as you work on your healing journey. And you learn to manage your trauma rather than it managing you. For sure.
I agree. And I'm curious your thoughts on this. So I read something earlier that was talking about, you know, don't just say that you're stronger because of your trauma. And I had to sit with this for a moment, because I am of the belief that you mentioned God, and I'm a Christian, and I believe that all things work together for good for those that love Him and are called according to His purpose. The Bible says so. And I do believe that. So I had to sit with that quote that I read earlier, but I'm curious your thoughts on this, like, because I have my own thoughts, but I want to know your thoughts. Because, you know, if someone comes to you and they said, you know, I've experienced this and it doesn't make me stronger, it's damaged me, versus someone coming and saying, this has made me a stronger person, I'm more vigilant. I mean, obviously you've taken your pain and turned it into purpose. So where is that line, or what makes that line blurred? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I feel like it does damage us. It absolutely, trauma and childhood abuse, absolutely. Not only does it damage us, but it does change the direction that I think we were originally meant to go. This stuff changes who we are, right? But I think what is positive about that quote is that as you move more onto your healing journey and you get to the point where the healing isn't affecting you like it was, that you now can turn to more growth, that's when it can make you stronger. Because I am a strong person today. I know because of my abuse, it has made me resilient. I know that's not what God intended for my life, but that's what I got dealt. And so I know I am a stronger person. I know I can get through stuff because of my past. And I got through all that. I'm here today. So, you know, it's just sometimes those quotes, you know, if you say it to a person in a certain stage of their life, it's going to hit them wrong.
I'm so glad you said that, because I agree with that 100%. We have to be very cautious how we handle people that are going through trauma. And I've seen that here. When I first started this podcast, I'm like, I'm not a therapist. I don't really know how to navigate that. But I thank God, because God gave me this platform, I think that He also helped me navigate that. And I am an empath, so I can feel like I can read people's emotions to some extent. But for someone that's listening to this, that is such a valid point, but also something that we really need to take to heart. Because if somebody's in this like fight or flight mode, or they're just trying to survive, like they're just in survival mode, sometimes it's not always good to just be like, oh, use your pain for purpose. You know,
you can trigger someone. That's the thing that we don't realize. For those people who don't have the trauma in their life, that don't get triggered, you know, they're surprised. They say something and then the person, you know, jumps at them and they don't realize they just triggered them. And we do need to be sensitive to that. We need to be sensitive to how we say things to people. And, you know, we can't tiptoe around, but we do need to. And that's something that I've added to my agenda, is having an oral editor, because I used to joke that I had a sharp tongue, and I did. I mean, I could be pretty vicious, and I was aware of that in my younger years, and I worked on that. And what I implemented is creating that pause before I say stuff, and, you know, send it through the oral editor before it comes out of my mouth, and at least have it come out of my mouth a much more a nicer way than maybe I could have done in the past. So we do need to be careful of what we say to people, and you know, and it happens. You trigger someone you don't mean to, you know, it happens.
It's part of just being a human. It's just,
that's right.
We're imperfect. We're perfectly imperfect, you know, some would say. But it's true. And I do believe, though, that what you said, I agree with you. I think it does matter what stage they're in and what part of healing that they're in. I do believe that if we have the choice you were all given a decision, we have free will, we can make a choice. I come out of not physical abuse, but I was abused mentally and emotionally, and I can relate to that. And I made a decision when I come out of that situation that this will not destroy me. This will make me stronger. And I leaned into God. When people ask me, like, how did you overcome or whatever? I'm like, I leaned into God. I just clung to God in everything. And I actually got rid of a lot of things in my life where I could only hear that voice.
Me too.
And I do
believe,
I believe we're all given a choice. And so it's it's a it's a slow progress. It's a day by day choosing every day to be disciplined in what we're putting in our minds, what we're putting in our hearts, what the boundaries that we're allowing around us. But if someone's listening and they are in the midst of an abusive situation, I mean, first and foremost, and you tell me what you think, Lisa, but I think first and foremost, get out of the situation. You can, I was reading something recently about how abuse is really very traumatic because a lot of times this is happening in the home, the place that people should feel safe and secure and be comforted in that spot. And now this is happening, and it's not a one-time thing. If somebody robs you and holds a gun to your head, that's traumatic, but that's a one-time thing. Now I can move past it. But if this is happening on a daily basis and you're getting abused, whether it's physical or mental or whatever, it's happening on a daily basis, I think getting out of that situation. But what are your thoughts in saying that? My heart really goes out to people that are like children that are in an abusive situation with their parents. Like, what do you ever come across that, or what would you recommend, if there was like a teenager listening or someone even kids in the foster system, it is very prevalent for them to get abused.
It's very prevalent, and that's not the answer. And that's the scary part. If a teenager's listening and they're being abused, is that what you're asking? Like what advice I would give them? Absolutely. You need to tell an adult. You absolutely need to tell somebody, your school counselor, another adult that you trust. Usually, if you can go to a family friend or another family member and share with them, there's always that possibility that they're not going to believe them, but just keep saying it. Because there's always that possibility, right? That someone's not going to believe you or they're not going to do anything about it. And don't stop there. That you need to keep reaching out. The one thing that failed me in my life, and I would hate to see this happen to any child that's listening, is all the adults failed me. They all failed me. And so that's why I ended up on my own. Now, with that said, part of it was I didn't tell adults either. There were adults that witnessed what was going on, so they should have done something. But it was just kept so quiet. And, it festers in silence. Childhood abuse and trauma festers in silence. We've got to expose it. And so I would say find that safe place, that safe person that you can go and tell. And if you don't have someone, go to a police officer. Don't let it go though. If you can get yourself out of that situation as quick as you can, that's great. The part that concerns me though is kids getting out of that and then, like you say, being put in foster care. And then that just exacerbates the situation. But always tell, don't keep it silent. And if someone doesn't believe you, you go on to the next adult.
Yeah.
Because that could happen.
So I agree with you. Teenagers, that's a really heartbreaking thing for me. And I've often thought about this as well, because sometimes you see problems and you're like, what can I do? And the bad thing about abuse is it's happening again inside the home that you don't know unless somebody opens up and talks about it. But I want to address another thing that you had said previously about not knowing, because I think this is a thing as well.
Yes.
Have you read the book, The Body Keeps the Score? So that book comes up on this podcast a lot. Obviously, it's a very popular
Great book.
Yeah. But there's a part in there that stuck with me where he talks about a girl that had been abused and she didn't know it. And he, as a therapist, thought that she knew it. He's like, we've done group therapy. Do you know the part I'm talking about? He said, we've done group therapy for such a long time. And I thought she knew. And then one day, I don't know, they had been in group therapy for a long time. She comes to him and she says, do you think I could have been abused? And he's like, I thought you knew this. And so you saying that brought that obviously to my mind, but this is a whole nother issue where people, maybe they are in an abusive situation, but our mind has that mechanism to cut off. If it's more than we can handle, the mind kind of copes.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little bit, or have you had any experience with that?
I have. I had my own personal experience, like I shared. And when I was doing the workshop, that popped up a couple of times. I had one of my friends, actually, she was going to take the workshop. And she was taking it with a friend because she wanted to support the friend. And what she said to me is, well, my parents were alcoholics, but it was fine because they were fun. Well, she was abused. If you have alcoholic parents, they cannot take care of you the way you need to be taken care of. That's abuse. That's trauma. And so it is unfortunately so common. And I think part of it is because it's our normal. It's our normal. Even though as a child, I didn't like being hit. I didn't like being yelled at. It was my normal. It wasn't until later in my life, as an older child, when I started going to visit friends' houses, that I started watching the interactions between the family members and thought, well, gosh, I don't have that. That made me kind of pay attention to it. But I think it's really common, I have found, that people don't realize that they've been abused. And another part of the problem, I think, is because there's no book listing out all the abuses. There's not an outline for us that's handed to us going, look, this is what abuse looks like. So, we would know. And that's part of the most important thing for me is getting the awareness out there. Here's another statistic that will surprise you. I had a guest on my podcast. This is amazing. And he brings awareness. And the area he brings awareness in is children who are in sports. And in the United States, there are 20 million children a year that play sports, and over a third of them are still abused one way or another. And when you dig into that, there's so many different ways that people are being abused. So abuse is so big, and your definition of abuse is different than mine, possibly. What our grandparents went through today would be considered abuse, and back then it seemed normal.
So I'm curious about the sports thing, though. Is this because coaches are abusive, or is it because because they are in sports? There's something about that personality.
There's the coaches. There's even the parents. So there's parents that push their kids. Maybe the kid doesn't want to play football, and dad decided you're going to play football, and he's going to make him play. Mm. There's the different types. Like there's the team sports, but then there's like gymnastics and the single sports. So it's in a lot of different areas. When his name is Bobby Click, he's fascinating. He's just amazing. And, he says, I go around and I speak on this. And he said, I'll walk into a room, there'll be 500 people. And he says, I'll go down the questions of, who has a child in sports? And they put their hands up. Who knows someone who has, and by the time he gets done with the questions, practically the whole room has their hands up. So if you could even just educate that group alone, imagine the impact you could have. But it's just all different. He lists them out, a few of them out on my podcast of the different types of abuse within sports, because, sports is huge.
Yeah, I've actually never thought of that. I did interview someone a while back who was an athlete, and he talked about the abuse that he had endured and now is doing amazing things with, his turning his pain into purpose. But I had not really thought about that. So that's raising awareness even to me. And my kid plays sports.
Yeah.
So how many kids, has been on his team or whatever. And it also brings awareness, honestly, to me. Like, have I ever been too hard on him? Of course, he plays basketball, right, and I don't know much about basketball, so I don't think I'm very hard on him. But it does raise a lot of awareness around that. So I'm glad that you brought that up, actually.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about what this looks like when you realized that it wasn't just from your brother, that it was actually from your family as well. Like, what was that journey like once you found this out? Now you're kind of re-engaged with the whole healing process. Like, I have to re-heal. What did that look like for you?
It's interesting because it was, I'm still working through some of the forgiveness of my parents, because as I became aware of, oh, well, gosh, they abused me too. All of a sudden the stories started coming up, and the, remembering the stories of what happened and being angry about those situations. And so, one of the big things for me is I already knew my dad's history, and I knew my dad had been abused as well. He had left home at 14 years old. I didn't know my mom's story, though. My mom was really kind of secretive. And it wasn't until about 2 or 3 years ago, so that's how long it's been, and I was angry at her this whole time. Even though I would try to forgive her, I would still get angry with her because I didn't understand why she treated me the way I didn't understand. Then maybe about 3 years ago, I had a friend help me on my ancestry because I was looking up my parents, and my dad's went all the way back to the 1700s, but my mom wouldn't go back. So I couldn't figure out how to do that. So she helped me. When she finally put my mom's timeline together and I could see my mom's history, I had so much empathy for her. She had been she had a mom who married men left and right, lived with her grandmother. I would imagine, and we know the statistics as well, when it comes to having another man in the home that's not the father, there's a high likelihood that something's going to happen to the children, at least the daughters. So it put the brakes on. It made me cry. It made me have absolute empathy for that little girl of her. It made me understand a lot more about why she treated me the way she did, right? The part that I still get stuck on once in a while is I changed it for my son. Why didn't you change it for me? That's the one that still once in a while flares up and kind of makes me angry.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes I think they're not capable.
Yeah. Strong enough.
I'm also reading a book currently called The Emotion Code. I don't know if you ever heard of that book. Have you heard of it? He does talk in that book a little bit about how some generations are not strong enough, and the generational curse that can be passed down for, generation to generation. That book is it challenges the way you think in a lot of ways, but it's a great book, that makes you think a lot and makes you think a lot about the energetic, how we're made of energy and how energetically it can be passed down for, generation to generation.
Oh, absolutely. Because they've proven too, like Holocaust survivors, because in that case, the trauma gets into the DNA and it does get passed down. And they have found that children from Holocaust victims are trauma victims, and it's been passed down from the DNA. It's crazy.
Yeah, he does.
He
talks about
the DNA,
that.
and you got the emotional and the physical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and we are spiritual beings, and I think being a spiritual being, that does have to do with energy. You can't see energy, you can't see spirit, but if we look at
feel it,
you can feel it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting that you bring up the Holocaust survivors as well, because he talks about that in the book as well. And it's very interesting. It's a book I would highly recommend, especially for you to go check out. But, for listeners as well, he talks about this being the emotion code, it is a healing modality, and it's a spiritual healing modality. But it's very interesting because I had never heard of this before, and I was listening to another podcast where it was brought up, this idea of muscle testing, and you can use muscle testing to get to the base of your trauma. And it's very interesting to me, and I was like, I have to go check that out. So I went and read the book, and I'm like, if this is really works, which I don't have enough practical experience dealing with this, but if this truly does work, I mean, the power behind it and leaning into God to actually reveal, and I do believe this, to reveal the trauma that's inside of us. I do truly believe that everything we need is inside of us. God is a God of time and space, and I don't want to get off topic here, but I mean, he knows everything. So if we're connected to God and we're connected to the Holy Spirit, to me, that I can pray and I can ask, and he's going to reveal things into my subconscious that the Bible says, come with a pure heart, and he'll he'll speak with you,
Yes.
So I think that, again, I don't want to get too off tangent here, but I do believe that there is something to the generational curse and there is something to the energetic force. And that's both disheartening because you can say, well, I'm a victim because my family believed that and my family's family believed that. But it's also very, on the flip side of that, it's extremely exciting because it says, I can choose that this is not going to be me. The buck stops here. It's going to change with me. This generation stops here. And as a mother, I'm a mom and I look at my kids and I think I refuse to let a generational curse continue on with them. So I'll do whatever it takes. And sometimes it's just a matter of getting on the journey of the healing process and finding your way. What modality works for you? What thing works for you? What's going to help you in this path of healing? So speaking of that, though, you spoke of the workshops that they really helped you. Now you're working with people that have gone through trauma, and that is also healing and cathartic to feel like you're helping other people and gives your story purpose. What other modalities, what other things did you do to help you heal?
Well, and this is the biggest one I feel for people too, is going through trauma therapy, because there are modalities that will help you and not all of them work for everybody. What worked for me was EMDR. I know it's an acronym and I never remember the long title of it.
Me either.
Most people know by EMDR. That was one of the biggest things recently that helped me. A lot of journaling, writing was a big thing. Getting the stuff out of here and putting it on paper was a big thing for me. Implementing self-care. That sounds, like, oh, self-care, but it is really important, especially those of us that are empaths, especially those of us that are in the place where we're able to help other people. We need to have time to, restore ourselves and rebuild ourselves so that we can go back out and help. So that was a lot of it. The workshop, when I did the workshop, definitely, it seems like stuff would get stirred up in me about 2 or 3 weeks before the workshop. And then I would work through something. There would be something that was brought to my attention and I would work through it. And so much of it in the younger years was me and God. It really was. It was me crying out to him. It was me, being angry or whatever, and him really guiding me. That was a lot of it.
Yeah, I can attest to that as well. In my situation, which I don't think was nearly as severe, mine was not childhood trauma, childhood abuse, but I think there's a lot of power behind that. Just getting alone with God and knowing that, trusting yourself and trusting God to help you make those decisions to move forward.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about the people that you come in contact with, the people that you help. How I want to know how they find you, but then I also want to know what does this look like? Is it all ages that come to you? Are they all different types of abuse? Do these workshops help with different types of abuse, or are they kind of segmented?
So it does deal with pretty much any kind of abuse. And the one that I did years ago was actually done through my church that I was going to at the time. So it was very spiritually based, and again, super powerful. I can't even tell you, I could tell you stories that'll make you cry, that it's just amazing watching these women, heal. And so what I did, the workshop always stuck with me. It just always stuck with me. And so I rewrote it, basically. I took what I learned there and I rewrote it. And it's not as spiritual because now I want to be able to go around the world. When I did the workshop back then, it was done through church. It was done in my home. This is going to be more online. And it really deals with all types of abuse. It's a women's workshop. So I only work with women. The goal is to make a workshop for men down the road. But it's about an 8-week workshop, and we're not reliving and talking and just talking. We're actually doing work. That's why it's called a workshop. We're actually doing work to get ourselves on that healing journey or deeper into our healing journey. So it's really powerful.
I love that. And I'm kind of glad that you brought that up too, because obviously I think that all people need to heal from trauma. To me, I don't tell people this is not a Christian podcast. I believe in God and I think God can help you, and I'm not going to hide from that. However, I think all people need to heal from trauma, and you do need to find what works for you. And I'm glad that you have, I don't want to say separated the two, but you've kind of made this available for all people because,
Yes.
we all need help. And I believe that if you're in survival mode, it's really hard for you to move past that survival mode. You've got to get out of that survival mode. Then you can go explore spirituality, or it's not one comes before the other. But if someone doesn't believe that, I think that they still need a valid space, places to be heard, places to be healed.
Yeah.
And then if we do our jobs, I feel like as Christians, we love those people regardless who they are and where they come from. And this type of trauma, this type of abuse is severe. I think that it's so important for people like yourself. Your work is so valuable to just open your arms and welcome all people and let people know, like, hey, you're not alone in this.
No. That's what they feel so often is alone.
Yeah. Yeah. What about the shame? How often do you see that come up? Is that prevalent in almost every case?
Yeah. One of the first things we do in the workshop is the first workshop is they tell one quick story. And in every one of those stories, you will see a thread of shame. You will see a thread of shame. It is, and I know in my life, shame shut my voice down. That's what it does. I mean, I've done some research on shame. It's really interesting. To me, shame is not a positive emotion. Guilt can be a positive emotion. It can motivate you. Shame shuts you down. And I had Tim Fletcher on my podcast. He's a well-known complex trauma therapist. And I asked him, why is it we carry shame? We're the victims. Why aren't the perpetrators carrying the shame? And he said something that was so profound, and I know it to be true in my life. And he said, shame comes from the beliefs you have about yourself. And when he said that, I stopped and I paused and I thought, I know that to be true in my life because my beliefs about myself have changed and my shame is almost completely gone. It's kind of rare when it pops up. And when it does, I'm like, okay, why did that show up? And so that to me is encouraging because as we change the beliefs about ourselves, that shame is going to go away. And we're going to finally realize in our heart of hearts that, okay, this abuse that happened was not my fault. It was their fault.
Yeah, that is profound, what he said.
It is.
Yeah, because the thing about it too is if someone's been under emotional abuse or mental abuse, they're being told your decisions you can't make decisions. Like they may not say it in those words, but you basically make you feel like you can't make decisions. You're not smart enough. You're not strong enough. You're not courageous enough, whatever. You're not enough to make these decisions. And it's sad, but when you hear that for years, sometimes then to come out of an abusive situation and think that you actually are strong enough or courageous enough or, that you even have the ability to make a decision. It's almost like you're swimming upstream a little bit. Like you can't even, you're like, I can't make a decision because you believe those things. What we put into our minds consistently is what we begin to believe. So if you have someone that's telling you constantly, you're not enough, you come out of an abusive situation if you're 18 years old and this has been taught to you. I read something, speaking of that, I read something recently that said that parents kill more dreams of their kids than any other person in life. Yeah. But I can see how it's true. I can see how it's true.
Yeah.
Because even parents that are not abusive per se, our words have such power. And if we're not speaking life into that kid, it can kill their dreams. So you imagine just that on on that kind of level versus someone that's abusive and telling somebody what a piece of crap they are. They leave that situation. If you've been involved in that for 18 years and then you leave that situation and you're like, I really am a piece of crap. And then you go and you try to fill it with all these other things. And it's,
You do. And the problem too is you go into it because you keep hearing that over and over, and it becomes your belief and it becomes your filter. So pretty soon you turn 18 years old. You've heard all these years, you're a piece of crap, you're this, you're that. So then you've got that filter on. And so you see everything through that filter, and it skews everything, all of your perspectives.
I'm so glad you said it. You said it better than I said it. I was trying to say that, but so many words. No, that's why these podcasts are so awesome, because we have an idea and we're bouncing it off of each other, but it's so true. So talk to us a little bit about, like, say someone wanted to get involved into your workshops, or they're listening to this and they're like, I really want to figure out how to get more into that circle or get involved in things that are going to help me. What do you recommend? Like, what are those steps? How would they reach out to you
for the workshop?
Yeah,
so
or
just anything.
Yeah.
So, you like reaching out to me, or just what they could
For
do
help.
For
yeah,
help.
Like if they just said, hey, I'm listening to this and I think I probably need help, can they go to your website? Is there resources on there?
Yes.
Or okay.
So I've got two websites, but the one for the workshop is the Women's Childhood Abuse Healing Workshop.com. And on there is all the information about the workshop. It's really set up for someone who's beginning their healing journey or kind of on their healing journey. Someone like me who's gone this far, it's not really relevant for me. It's more the beginning. But if you go there, there's a lot of information. It's going to be an 8-week workshop, and I'm still dialing in because I'm right now, I'm literally doing the pilot program. And so I'm dialing it in for the real big workshop, which will probably happen in May. So I'm thinking it's going to be on the weekend, but it's an 8-week workshop, and you're going to be doing work every single night, and you're going to be doing work in between. You're going to have some homework, but it's all what it's geared to do is it's going to help you start your healing journey and get you on that path and get the momentum going,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, it's really good if you're in trauma therapy. If you're not, that's okay. We don't take people who are actively in their addiction. If they have any kind of addiction, that needs to be worked on, and you need to be clean for a year before you do the workshop, because you will get triggered, and you need to be able to, have your therapist's approval on that. But other than that, we'll take any woman, anybody 18 or older, minors, that's something different. But I've had anything from, women in their 20s all the way up into their 70s. One of the sweetest stories I had was a woman she was 75, and she took our workshop. She had never even shared her story with her husband, and they were married like 50 something years. And bless her heart, she got in there, she did the work and worked really hard. And about a year later, her granddaughter came up to us at church and said, I have to thank you. She said, my grandma took your workshop, and this last year has been the best year of my grandparents' life ever. You cannot pay me enough money for that. Like that right there, that is what I want for others. That's just beautiful.
I love it. And it is. There's so much power in sharing your story, not just power in what you're sharing with other people, but power in what is happening in you every time you release some of that. So I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
What would someone, like, say they go through this? You said it's an 8-week.
It is. Mm-hmm.
So if someone goes through 8 weeks, kind of what do you expect should happen if they do all the work?
Boy, they're going to have such awareness, because part of what your healing process that really accelerates it is knowledge, is understanding trauma and understanding how it affects you, where your behavior comes from, because that's where a lot of the shame comes from, is from our, triggering behavior that happens, and we don't understand it. But as you learn more about, trauma and how it affects you, it's empowering. It's empowering because you now have the ability and the self-awareness to go, wait a minute, I recognize I'm being triggered. What's going on here? And you can walk yourself through it rather than what I used to do, which is blow up make a mess of everything, and then have to spend the next week cleaning it up from hurting people and hurting myself. So that's what they're going to get within the 8 weeks. But the other part of it that I really love is they're going to have lifelong support. So they're going to go from that workshop into a women's healing community where we're going to do interactive things with them, Q&A. They'll interact with each other. It's going to be a whole support system we're going to have for them. So they're not going to finish the workshop and we're going to say, see, it was really great having you here. You know, they're going to have lifelong support.
Yeah. And you have this podcast as well. So this kind of lets people know more about you and about what you do. And then just the awareness and things behind it as well. So there's different ways to get involved with what Lisa's doing. And I always love to talk to people that are doing amazing things and using what they've been through to truly empower others, because that's really
Beauty
what
from
it's
ashes.
It sure is. It sure is. And it's what it's all about when we're put here on this earth. We're actually here for a purpose. I believe everybody has a purpose, and life experiences can push us in the direction of that purpose. It can shape us and mold us, and we just have to make the decision to do that. But with that being said, if you had something that you just really wanted to leave my audience with that kind of wrap all this up in a nice package and just say, I really want to leave them with this, what would that be?
That healing is for everyone. I am nobody special. My life is amazing. It's more amazing than I ever imagined, but it's not because I'm somebody special. It's because I worked really hard, and that's just for everybody. And I want to be that person that helps them on that journey.
Uh-huh. There's work involved in anything worth having.
Yes.
But there's beauty on the other side of that work.
So true. And freedom.
Yeah. And freedom. I'm so glad you added that. It's so true. So I just, I hope that this resonated with some people that see the need. And even if they don't necessarily, they're just curious. Like, go explore these things. Sit with yourself. Journal. Do the things that is going to help you introspect in yourself. And then if you see that you need help, we have all the resources for you. Either you can reach out to me, reach out to Lisa. But definitely life is too short, and there's beauty on the other side of pain. If you choose to see it that way, change your perspective and reframe it in a way that is going to give you power. It's going to empower you instead of disempower you.
Exactly. Yeah. We've been walking around disempowered long enough.
That's right. That's right. So is there anything else you'd like to say before we close up today, Lisa?
Well, thank you for having me here. Yes, and the listeners can reach out to me if they just want to ask questions. I won't put any pressure on you, but I'm certainly here to answer any questions or give you any support you may need.
Yeah. And you're in California, but this is a virtual program that's good for anybody all over the world.
All over the world.
I love it. Well,
yeah.
I thank you so much for coming here today and sharing your expertise with us, and just sharing your story too, and letting people know they're not alone, and for doing your part to give back to those who are in the midst of all of this. So, and healing, and on their healing journey.
Yes. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for listening to Through the Trauma podcast. If you have found value in this episode or believe in the mission behind what we are doing, please subscribe so that you never miss any future episodes. Also, be sure to check out our transformation project at transformationthroughtraumaproject.com, where we help inspirational stories get heard on a larger scale through multiple platforms. If you know someone who can benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Until next time.